All right, let's get right into it. Whenever there's a crisis brewing in the Persian Gulf, it feels like a familiar script starts playing out almost immediately. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a really big part of that script. We're looking at the myth versus the reality of building a modern military coalition.
And that quote really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? The coalition question. The second a U.S. operation gets announced, the very next thing you hear is how our allies will be right there with us, shoulder to shoulder. But have you ever stopped to wonder how deep that promise really goes? As we're about to see, the idea of a grand alliance and the actual reality on the water, well, they're often two very, very different things.
This brings us to what you could call the coalition playbook. I mean, if you've paid attention to major U.S. military actions over the last, say, 30 years, think about Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, this whole process is going to sound super familiar. Yeah, they all had different strategic goals, but every single one was kicked off with the same promise of Allied support. It's predictable, and honestly, it's a politically essential first move.
And here's that playbook broken down. It's really simple. Step 1, the U.S. announces what it's going to do. Step 2, it immediately follows up by promising that allies are on board. And Step 3, you project this powerful image of global unity. It's a fantastic political message, right? It's designed to show everyone, especially the American public, that this isn't just America going it alone. But the real question, the one we're digging into, is how much of that promise actually survives first contact with reality?
Okay, so this is where we pivot from the playbook's myth to the, let's call it the messy reality. Because once you start digging into the strategic calculations for potential allies, that shiny idea of a massive multinational task force, it starts to look a lot less certain.
So let's just be real for a second. The United Kingdom? They're almost always the most reliable military partner for the US. We can pretty much count them in. But the real question is, after the Brits, who else is actually willing and able to send serious hardware? And I'm not talking about a patrol boat here. I'm talking about destroyers, frigates, ships that can actually fight and sustain themselves in a pretty dangerous neighborhood. And once you set the bar that high, the list of who can and will show up gets very short very fast.
For our European allies, you can see there's a massive disconnect. I mean, they're already dealing with huge energy security headaches because of the whole situation with Russia. Their economies are shaky, and their citizens are just plain tired of foreign wars. So asking them to send their navies into a conflict that could send their energy prices through the roof, that is not just a tough sell. For a lot of European leaders, it's pretty much political suicide.
And you know, for key Asian allies like Japan and South Korea, it's even more of a straight-up contradiction. Their entire economies run on the oil and natural gas that flows right through that very region. So, joining a coalition to blockade the shipping lanes they depend on for survival? That's kind of like helping someone cut the power line to your own house. It's in direct conflict with their most basic national interests.
And it's not even just about the economics. Just look at the diplomatic minefield they'd have to walk through. For any country trying to maintain decent relationships all over the world, picking a hard side against Iran isn't just risky, it's just bad for business. It makes everything complicated with other big players like China and Russia. You know, sometimes the smartest geopolitical move you can make is no move at all.
So where does all this lead? It leads to the harsh reality of so-called burden sharing. And believe me, there is a world of difference between a country putting out a supportive press release and that same country actually sending a warship and putting its sailors in harm's way.
This quote just nails it because it speaks to a pattern we've seen time and time again. You can look back at past coalitions. The initial announcement might list, a dozen countries. But when you look at who's actually doing the combat patrols, who's taking on the real risk, that list shrinks down to just a few. The support from most partners ends up being more symbolic than it is substantial.
And here's what that cosmetic burden sharing actually looks like in practice. The U.S. Navy will almost certainly end up doing the vast majority of the work. We're talking something like 85% of the operational load. The Royal Navy, to their credit, will make a real contribution, let's say 10%. And that last 5%? Well, that's going to be a handful of token ships from everybody else combined. This isn't really burden sharing, it's more like burden shouldering, and the U.S. is doing most of the lifting. So what exactly do we mean by a token contribution? It's a strategic calculation. A country might send one ship, or maybe offer logistical help like letting U.S. planes fly through their airspace. It's just enough to show up on the list of coalition members and stay in Washington's good books, but it does virtually nothing to reduce the actual strain on the U.S. military.
And look, this imbalance isn't just about what's fair, it has serious real-world consequences.
When a coalition really only exists on paper, the immense operational stress falls almost entirely on U.S. forces, and especially on the U.S. Navy.
You know, running an effective naval blockade is one of the most complex things a military can do. It's not as simple as just parking a few ships out on the water. You need a constant, layered defense. You need everything from submarines and minesweepers to round-the-clock air cover and a whole fleet of supply ships. It's a massive, synchronized machine, and you just can't run it with a handful of ships.
And the most important number here is 24/7. There are no breaks, no nights off. A blockade demands a persistent, nonstop presence, and that relentless pace is what just grinds down ships, it grinds down equipment, and most importantly, it grinds down the sailors who are out there doing the job.
And here's the thing. While the U.S. Navy is without a doubt the most powerful in the world, it's not infinite. It's already stretched incredibly thin with other vital missions all over the globe. And this is the strategic vulnerability an adversary is absolutely banking on. They know they can't win a head-to-head fight. Their whole strategy is to outlast the blockade, to wait until the strain becomes too much, politically and militarily, for Washington to sustain. They're playing the long game.
And eventually, this operational reality starts to create political problems back home. The initial headlines all promise this broad coalition, but the pictures on the news night after night show a mostly American force taking all the risks. That gap, the one between the promise and the reality, it doesn't go unnoticed for very long.
This is so critical to understand. Building a real coalition, a genuinely effective one, is a slow, difficult, diplomatic slog. It takes months of tough negotiations over rules of engagement, command structures, and logistics. You can't just hold a press conference, announce a coalition, and expect it to magically appear ready for a fight.
This table just lays out the disconnect perfectly. It's really easy for an ally to offer the things on the left side, right? A supportive statement, a vote at the UN. That stuff costs them very little. But the things on the right? That's the hard stuff. That's putting your ships and your people in danger for months at a time. And that is a level of commitment that very, very few are willing to make.
So, what's the bottom line here? When you look at the historical pattern, it strongly suggests that the United States is going to be shouldering almost the entire military burden of this operation. Britain will be there as a dedicated and capable partner, but that broader international support, it's likely going to stay mostly political and symbolic.
And this really is the question that hangs over this entire scenario. As the weeks drag into months, and the costs and the risks become clear, the American public is going to look at this situation and ask a very simple and a very powerful question. If this mission is so important for the entire world, where is the rest of the world?
Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with. Given all of these complex calculations, the economics, the diplomacy, the military realities, which countries, if any, do you think will actually defy the odds and provide a truly meaningful contribution? It's a critical question to ponder, and the answer, or maybe the lack of an answer, is what will ultimately define the success and the sustainability of this whole thing. Definitely something to think about.